And the critique is of Indians' own failure to maintain order and love and communal peace.
Welcome to VoiceOver. I'm your host, Heather Bigley, and I talk to people about the movies that made a mark, that led to cinematic epiphanies, and it's not always the movie you'd expect. Today's movie is Earth, or if you're in India, Earth 1947. The film was adapted from Bapsi Sidhwa's novel, Ice Candy Man, or here, published in America, it's called Cracking India. Deepa Mehta both adapted and directed the film, which has, as its backdrop, Partition, or the cataclysmic demarcation by the British of India and Pakistan in 1947. It's an event that continues to reverberate in Indian-Pakistani relations and Hindu-Muslim relations on the subcontinent, largely due to the authoritarian regime of Modi right now. The story is fairly simple. A family in Lahore watched the violence of partition erupt around them. The family servants are Hindu and Muslim, and everyone must decide how to protect themselves. The story is told through the perspective of the child, Linny Baby, as she observes her Hindu ayah, or nanny, courted by two Muslim men. Ultimately, the ayah is betrayed at the hands of a mob. The film stars Amir Khan, one of the biggest Bollywood stars in the 1990s and 2000s, and the movie boasts the music of A.R. Rahman, one of the most incredible composers in Bollywood music. But I would not call this a Bollywood film. It's a joint Canadian-Indian independent production. Deepa Mehta herself is Indian, but she has lived in Canada for decades. My guest today is Raj Mankad, the deputy opinion editor at the Houston Chronicle. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 2025 for editorial writing, shared with Sharon Steinmann, Lisa Falkenberg, and Leah Binkovitz for a series on dangerous train crossings in Houston. We've known each other since attending the University of Houston in the early 2000s. If you want to see Earth, you can only really see it on YouTube in the US, and the film is in Gujarati and Hindi and English, among other languages. But the captions are misaligned, so I don't feel any sadness in talking to you about the ending of this film, because you probably won't see it. But you should, if you can. Stick around after the conversation for recommendations.
I'm not 100% sure how I first saw Earth or learned of it. I think that I was just making my way through the Elements trilogy. I think it was when I got to Houston. I think we were in the same class maybe when we read Ice Candy Man by Bapsi Sidhwa. And then the other really strange thing is that I took a job as Bapsi's personal assistant for like half a year. So she lived in Houston, the woman who wrote the novel.
So what was it like working with her?
What was it like working with Bapsi? It was pretty hilarious. She belonged to the Parsi community. So they're Zoroastrians. They actually speak the same language that my family speaks, Gujarati, although we spoke in English together. The Zoroastrians are known for their humor. And it was pretty nonstop with her. She was always poking and jabbing and making little funny remarks about everything. I remember she was really dismayed when she learned that I was going to get married. She was like, "No, you'll never write a novel then." And then she had some really hilarious, like, strong thoughts about other writers who lived in Houston, which I can't repeat because they were so incendiary. She was particularly wicked. She was particularly wicked about other Indian American writers. In her view, Salman Rushdie basically owed everything to her. He's like, he copied my techniques.
Okay. That's funny. I love that.
Yeah.
You knew Bapsi. You hung out with Bapsi. It sounds like, because she has polio, that the book in some ways is autobiographical. Is that true?
So at the time of her childhood, the British were still the rulers of India. And the Indian country that they ruled included what is now Pakistan and Bangladesh. So all of that together was one country. And she grew up in a town called Lahore, which is now in Pakistan. As a child, she saw that violence that occurred when the British decided to just chop the country into pieces. The perspective she had as a child and as a Parsi gives her telling like a special kind of neutrality. You see it through this innocent kid's eyes, and also through the eyes of someone who's neither Muslim nor Hindu, and also not Sikh. The main communities that were engaged in sectarian violence, she wasn't a part of any of them. And the Parsis were known for sort of being collaborative and neutral. And like the character Lenny in the movie and in the book, she had this disability. There's this whole tradition, right? Like in novels, in movies, it's very common in Indian narratives, but also like all over the world, where the narrator's body, especially if it's a woman's body, stands in for the nation. And I think that happens in a couple of different ways. She has this brace on her leg and she's limping along, and the British had basically impoverished India, this set of nations that had at one point been the wealthiest in the world. Under the British became a place of famine and widespread poverty. There's some kind of metaphorical thing happening, but it's also really it's her life. She really was there. She really did see that violence.
I think it's important to mention here, just for my audience, who the Farsi are, right? These would have been people who came from Iran and migrated to India. It's interesting, within the movie, there's this line when Lenny Baby asks her mom,
"Mommy, but Cousin Ali says that we Parsis are bum lickers of the English."
So? Well, I don't think that we are bum lickers actually.
Then what?
Yeah, miss. Have you seen those lizards in the garden? The ones that change color? Sardo, chameleon. The Parsis are a little bit like that actually.
Lizards?
Chameleon. The Parsis also take on the color of the people around them. Karvuj pare to survive. There are so few Parsis in the world, Leno. It's safer not to stand out. When the Parsis came to India from Persia 1300 years ago, the Indian prince would not let us enter his country. ये लोग अंदर आवा नहीं दीदा. Pachi, a wise man, sent a gift to the Indian prince. Ek dudna bowl with sugar inside. And he said, we Parsis will be like the sugar in the milk. Mitto, but invisible. Samjhi?
We're not bum lickers. We are invisible.
And so we're supposed to understand that they blend in, but they bring with them delight and richness to the community. There's multiple ways to react to that story. And one of them is, oh, that's a really nice way to think of refugees coming into a country. But also there's this point about no longer being distinct, no longer being a community in your own right. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think about that story quite a bit. I think I'd heard it from my family before I even saw the movie or read the book. So it's actually one that's told. I had the same kind of ambivalent feeling because my family came as immigrants. I was born in the United States. There's this constant struggle immigrants have where you work so hard to fit in and to integrate and acculturate, but then you also want to hold on to who you are. And at some point, you don't want to have to prove or try that hard. You just want to be. And so I related to that bum liquor comment and the dismay over it. And you can see in the movie, the Parsi community were also wealthier because they tended to be the middlemen between colonial administrators and the general populace. And they might have handled like financing or banking or law. You can see in the movie the father of Lenny is often wearing a suit or a starched shirt, or at one point He's like recreating in like a very classic British outfit with like the shorts and the khaki and the like little hunting cap thing. It's kind of hilarious and embarrassing. And this is one of the reasons why I care about this movie. And I rewatched it with my son just recently, and he's 15 now. The movie's important to me because it helps me make sense, and I was hoping it helped my son make sense of our own background and our place in that history, which has affected our family's lives, but people don't talk about very much. For example, my community in India also tended to work with the British or with other rulers. So there were also a lot of people in my family who were lawyers and translators and doctors and teachers and diplomats. I was talking to one of my uncles about partition and Indian independence, and he was telling me that it was a sad time in his family because they were employed. His father, I believe, was employed by a prince or a ruler of a small city-state that was within the British Empire. And basically they became unemployed, and the family like lost their status and income with Indian independence. Or my brother's in-laws, his wife's family, they also lived in Lahore, and they were displaced as Hindus who lived there and were diasporized. You know, now that family lives all over the world in different countries, and they were basically refugees. One of my grandfathers was a grain buyer. My grandmother told me that he was in the Punjab acquiring grain for this dairy that he worked for in what was then Bombay. And then he had to hide. It was a struggle to get home safely. Our families were affected by partition. My dad was born in colonial India. Like it was 1945. He still remembers seeing "Quit India," which was the slogan telling the British to leave India. Quit India. So he remembers seeing "Quit India" like painted all over things, like on rail cars and that kind of thing. And the other reason I was really into Earth. So I was a teacher at the University of Houston. I was a teaching fellow. Basically, I had a whole class of undergraduate students I had to teach entry-level writing, like how to write a college essay. But I had a ton of freedom in how I taught the class. And in 2003 and 2004, there was the invasion of Iraq. And I really wanted my students to understand or experience how complicated, let me put it this way. At the time, the United States was ruling Iraq. We had a U.S. administrator in charge of that whole country. And there was discussion among U.S. politicians of partitioning Iraq because you had the Kurds in the north and you had the Shias and the Sunnis. And I just remember thinking like, wow, here we are and we haven't learned our lessons. We, as a people, have no concept of how much decisions made here can affect lives in other countries and how we don't really understand the nuances of those places and how diverse they are and how these different communities have lived together for hundreds of years. And so I showed the movie to a bunch of undergraduates at the University of Houston. I mean, these were kids, 18-year-olds, just out of high school. And the magical thing about the University of Houston is that you basically had this even mix of Latinos, African-American kids, white kids, Asian kids, kids from India, an amazing mix. And so I was showing them this movie about another community, another place that has different religions, different backgrounds. It kind of blew their minds. They were very confused. They couldn't tell the Muslims from the Hindus and the Sikhs from the Muslims. And they had no idea what a Parsi was. And so I had to make a little guide for them. We'd watch like 30 minutes of it and then have a little bit of a discussion. And the way I made it make sense to the kids, or the way I tried to provoke them into thinking about what would it mean to partition a country, I said, well, what if Texas were suddenly divided? Like, what if tomorrow politicians drew a line through the middle of Texas with like Austin and Dallas on one side and Houston and San Antonio or something on the other. And half the state was for Latinos and half the state was for white people. And there was no consideration given for black folks. And you guys just had to like figure it out the next day. And that's kind of when it sunk in.
I love that you're telling me this story because when I was at the University of Houston and the Iraq War was going on, I showed Battle of Algiers.
Yes, I did
and I
too.
was like, hey guys. Yeah.
That's an intense one. In Earth, at least, maybe much more so than in Battle of Algiers, you were really swept up in this love story, in this narrative. It's not that hard to identify with Lenny or with her Aya, her nanny. And the nanny's this beautiful Hindu woman, and there's all these men who are showering her with attention. There's several Muslim guys, and there's a Hindu, and there's a Sikh, and they form this kind of miniature version of the country. Amir Khan, who plays Ice Candy Man, is this brilliant actor. And I remember a lot of my students ended up writing papers about his eyes, because by the end of the movie, you're like, wow, he has changed. He has internalized all this like hatred and anger and vengeance.
So this movie, as you say, is a romance, but at the same time, it's essentially the story, for me, this time that I was watching it, of the radicalization of Ice Candy Man. And he moves away from being called Ice Candy Man to his actual name, which is Dil Nawaz. And he becomes a Muslim man who has been wronged because his sisters have been killed in this ghost train. How does he cope with that horror and that violence? And his decision is, well, I will become an arbiter of horror and violence myself. And that, to me, is, you know, the great tragedy of the film.
That's right.
And
that's right.
I think what's so interesting about this movie is that last scene. I mean, you mentioned here how Lenny is a stand-in for India, but the Aya at the end is the stand-in for India as well.
Absolutely.
Which is an interesting turn from this Farsi to this Hindu woman, identifiably Hindu, who we understand is going to be killed, raped, mutilated, tortured, as she's hauled off by this Muslim mob. Well, talk to me about Dil Nawaz a little bit more.
He's this really light figure, humorous, loves to quote poetry, but by the end of the film, he's been radicalized because of this ghost train where he finds his sister who's been slaughtered while she's fleeing the part of India that becomes Hindu majority. One reason I like showing it to my students at the University of Houston was that it is about the colonization of India, and it is in the context of the British partitioning India. But there's barely any British presence. It decenters the British. You know, that's the context and the backdrop. And the critique is of Indians' own failure to maintain order and love and communal peace. The idea is that the British created the conditions for all of that violence, and they created the conditions for Ice Candy Man to be radicalized that way. Deepa Mehta, the filmmaker, is relentless at putting a lot of different communities, different religions under this magnifying lens, and she's really unafraid to look at what's wrong, like with injustices. But in Earth, nobody comes away looking good.
This is also, I mean, it's 1998, so we're seeing the rise of the Hindu right at this point in India. And I was thinking about that as I watched the end of the film, because the end of the film is the fear that the Hindu right uses all the time against Muslim communities. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, how did this play in India in 1998. Because even though we know that Dilnawaz has his reasons, that end image of the ayah taken away, screaming, right, by this Muslim mob, to me, I felt like, oh my gosh, this is just something that Modi would just play on repeat, right? Like, this is exactly what he keeps arguing about Muslim men.
Yeah, it's amazing that it even got made and that India put it forward as their Academy Award nomination. Just, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Especially because Deepa really pissed people off with her other films. Fire and Water, like, are unflinching looks at problems in Hindu communities. And Water, the set of Water, was attacked by Hindu nationalists. Yeah. And she had to pause the making of the movie for several years, and then eventually she was able to complete it in Sri Lanka.
Oh, wow.
I mean, she was really attacked, like, physically, her set was. I think that when the film played in India, a lot of the scenes were edited down. I think Deepa Mehta had to really navigate multiple countries' politics. Like, surely she had to make decisions that would make Canadians happy and her funders in Canada happy. And then, you know, when she's filming in India, she had to navigate that whole politics. There's still a lot of silence about partition. I don't think that Indians or Pakistanis have resolved their feelings about it or the history of it. The number of people who died, the number of people who were displaced, all those things are disputed.
Yeah. I want to talk about why you are thinking about this movie now. Because when you mentioned this movie, you said, oh, I've been thinking a lot about this movie lately. And Maya, your wife, even said to me, oh, yeah, Raj is talking to everybody about Earth right now. So I'm interested in what's going on. Why are you connecting to this film at this point?
Man, I'm thinking a lot of different things all at once. Earth is about a society that had this veneer of order and peace, of people from different backgrounds getting along and living together for hundreds of years, and really having an intimacy, even though each of their communities, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Shias, the Sunni, the Parsis, the Sikhs, they had their own cultures and their own different quarters of the cities, but their lives were bound up with one another. You can see in the movie how just in a matter of days all of that came apart. Maybe I'm thinking about it because I live in this polyglot city in Houston, and when I visit Salt Lake City, the part of it that I stay in, Midvale, is also diverse, and maybe we're taking for granted our ability to live like this, and we shouldn't. At times it feels like the country is coming apart at the seams, and that everybody's at each other's throats and nobody has anything in common, and our politics have become super divisive. There's like a majority of people who believe our democracy is falling apart for different reasons. You know, you can have people who live together for generations, but then it falls apart because of the underlying conditions, the political schisms, and we have to be on guard. I don't know what the antidote is, but I think it's just joy. The thing we need to do is just celebrate how good we have it. We were talking earlier about this project I have where I go up and down this street in Houston where all these international shops, all these different restaurants and churches and mosques and temples and all these different kinds of people from around the world all live along and work along this one street. It's called Westheimer. We need to witness those things and enjoy them and celebrate them and not let that disappear.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is we've lived in this space where we've had the opportunity to be in a diverse community, and we're in a moment right now which is asking us, how much do we actually value it? And I can do the things to let my political representatives know I value this diversity. It is important to my life. And it's important to my conception of what I think America is. And therefore, I want you to defend it. I don't want you to tear it down.
Yeah. That's right. And talk about movies and show them to each other and make ourselves think about what we have to gain, what we have to lose, what's at stake, how things can fall apart, and how we have to constantly be on watch and constantly be vigilant. But I don't want it to only be this negative thing, right? Because joy ends up being more radical in the long run. Your love for your neighbor and your potluck with them, or your, I don't know, wrapping their pipes to make sure they don't freeze. That's the radical thing. We have to work to protect what we have, protect those families, and then celebrate like what should be celebrated, which is like this rich fabric that we've made. A lot of these people have fled violence or economic peril or environmental catastrophes, and they've come here with not very much and made something out of it and made a wonderful life for themselves, and also made our own cities like richer.
Yeah. Tell me about, so you mentioned briefly that you saw this with Vishwa, your 15-year-old son.
Yeah.
Did he get out of it what you wanted him to get out of it, or what was his take?
He has been to India and he has some knowledge. But even for him, it was tough to figure out, like, wait, how can you tell the Muslims apart from the Hindus? Which is kind of the point, right? He thought it was incredibly sad and tragic. We'll keep talking about it. But, like, sometimes when I'm with family and, like, somebody suddenly starts shouting, or somebody, like, has a reaction to something that seems irrational, I think about how that person's mother was a refugee, or that person's grandparents had to flee their city, or grow up in a colonized country where famine was rampant because of the decisions of the British.
Yeah.
I want him to know all that. I want it to be in the back of his mind.
Yeah.
And also, I really like Deepa Mehta. I really think that you love your culture by criticizing it. In America, we tend to, like, sample different religions and, like, sort of the buffet version of spirituality. But, like, if you really belong to a faith, then you understand the problems within the faith as well. Like, the whole of it. So, like, I know that there's the Hindu nationalists, and they really are upset with Deepa Mehta all the time, and they attacked her set. But at least for me, being an immigrant in the United States, where Hinduism isn't really part of the daily life of the country, and we're like a little tiny minority, I need movies like this to show me and help me talk to my kids about, like, things that go wrong.
It's always great to talk to Raj. You should check out his interview on In Good Faith from 2022, where he talks about growing up Hindu in Alabama in the 1980s. How about some recommendations? If you're interested in Amir Khan and those eyes, you should check out Rang de Basanti, about a group of Indian youth who discover the history behind the 1931 martyrdom of Bhagat Singh, who had gathered a group of diverse compatriots around him to fight for Indian independence. It's a full-on Bollywood experience with great music and even a depiction of a celebration of Holi. Instead of Earth's disintegration of the religiously diverse group, this film shows how men of different religions come together to model the new nation. If you're interested in other stories about citizens hoping to survive forces larger than themselves, check out Persepolis. It's an animated film adapted from a graphic novel memoir, and the movie shares the experience of a wisecracking teenager in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution, who was sent by her parents first to Vienna and then to Paris to escape Islamic extremism. It's a punk rock story of exile and longing and learning to be yourself. And I'm going to give you another book. I've got to say, you should read Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. It's been adapted by Deepa Mehta, but I haven't seen the film yet, so I don't know. Midnight's Children is about partition as well, via magic realism, unreliable narrators, and a celebration of both pickles and noses. It's a classic for a reason. And if you read it, maybe you can decipher the influence of Bapsi Sidhwa and get back to us about that. That's our show. I'm your host, Heather Bigley. Voiceover is produced by BYU Radio and is edited by Spencer Boyer.